You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight, on episode 41, we're going to go around the league discussing the latest Overwatch League news, or World Cup news, technically. Really not a whole lot going on Overwatch League news side, just because, you know, it is playoff week. So, with that being said, we will take a look at the 6 playoff teams and preview this week's quarterfinals matches. But before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-hosts, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us tonight here live for our live show, and of course thank all of our repeat listeners. Of course, as always, as you can tell, I do have a few friends with me here tonight to help break everything down. Up first, fresh off the heels of a Realm LAN event, we have my hashtag soulmate Slambo. And Slambo, you know, it's playoff week. We're finally here. We can talk some playoffs. But how you doing tonight, brother?
What's up, nerd? And yeah, you know, I think I got my Realm Royale fix, as you mentioned, at a local LAN tournament at the esports arena here in Las Vegas. So really just an excuse to kind of go down to the event, to the venue, you know, check it out, see what it was like, pay for some really expensive beer, and waste $15 on a tournament. You know, sounded like a great. No, I mean, it was fun, but that's done. That I'm over it. It is now time to look forward to the future. I feel like we've had a nice break. Like Realm Royale came out at a nice time for me, you know, when the Overwatch League was kind of going into its a calm before the storm, if you will. So good timing, but I'm ready to be Overwatch League focused. I'm ready to watch some high level Overwatch take place with some of the best teams in the world and really just get a resolution to this season. It's been a long one.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out the fact that the day that Sleepy shows up is the day I'm not wearing my Australia jersey. Just pointing that out. I see how it is. But of course, you know, we are also joined by our mastermind behind all of our YouTube content. That being Spider. Spider, you still hamming it up? I know you got some stuff in the works.
Oh yeah, I am still playing Hammond because I still refuse to call him Wrecking Ball, just like everybody else in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I have a lot of footage ready for videos for when he comes out. We kind of did a little bit on the PTR last time and it worked out pretty well, but I kind of wanted to do videos for his actual release this time because I feel like that's really when people will get invested in like the strategies and how to actually use him now that the fanfare of what he actually does has died down. And they're still tweaking him. I mean, they made a change to him as early as 3 days ago. So, you know, I kind of wanted to wait to see how he would finalize going into live. So I'm still enjoying him immensely. I think he will kind of slot into that off tank role, and I think he's going to pair well with Winston and Diva, and we may see the return of the dive meta because he just rolls over Brigitte if Brigitte doesn't see him coming, and most times she doesn't. So, but you know, enough of Hammond, man. This is a big week for us. This is the week we've been waiting for since, you know, concept of this show. This is season 1 playoff week. So why don't we get this World Cup crap out of the way and let's get to the good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, as you guys know, the World Cup is on the horizon here, and we now know basically all of the rosters, at least the 12-man rosters for all the countries. We don't know all the finalized 7-man rosters, but let's talk a little bit about the returning champions of the prior 2 World Cups, that being South Korea, and yeah, they're looking pretty poised to do a three-peat in this year's Overwatch World Cup, and they have narrowed down their 12-player roster down to 7 players, so we now know who are going to be representing South Korea, and really, it's no surprise who the core of this roster is going to be. So on the tank line, we have Fate from the LA Valiant, Meko from the New York Excelsior. The support line, we have both New York Excelsior supports in Jonek and Arc. For damage, we have the DPS duo from NYXL, that being Sabiobi and Libero, and then rounding out as, their other flex player, not that they don't have enough flexibility as is Carpe from the Philadelphia Fusion. So just as a reminder, the South Korea group stage does kick off on August 17th, so, we're still a little bit out, but that'll be basically that weekend through the 19th. And they're looking to make it out of the group stage, which really shouldn't be a problem. I mean, their group isn't necessarily as stacked as some of the others because they're with Russia. We got Japan, Finland, which is definitely the other scary team in that group. We got Taiwan and Hong Kong. So as you can see, 5 of the 7 players are from the New York Excelsior. And what was interesting about this is the fact that South Korea was one of the few countries that actually didn't hold tryouts, and given how much talent is in that region, I was kind of taken back by that, just because really, no matter who they would field, you could basically argue that even their B or even C team would definitely still give a lot of these other countries a run for their money. But I just want to get your guys' thoughts on the overall roster and the fact that Fisher is nowhere to be seen. He's not going to be the main tank. What do you think brought that on in regards to having Fate over Fisher for, kind of that decision making?
I mean, there has to be something intangible that we don't see, because on paper, Fisher is the better tank. I mean, we've seen it through the league. So there either has to be communication, or maybe Fisher decided he, kind of wanted to drop off and just be like a sub. Who knows? I mean, because who's better than Fisher? No one.
6 Fishers.
The answer, the 6 Fishers, right? And the rest of the team is NYXL. It's NYXL. That shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, they're the all-star team, but when you talk about these players individually, they're all in the top 3 of their categories. Hell, most of them are the top in their categories. So it really shouldn't be a surprise. The bigger one I'm surprised about is that Mono was left out completely. He wasn't even mentioned. So again, that comes down to maybe an intangible. He didn't want to do it because he did it last year, or maybe they thought these were better. Korea has, like you said, that it has the depth of talent that they didn't need tryouts. It's kind of like how France did it last year. They were like, well, we've already got this established team that does well, so why not we just take a majority of that team or that whole team and just, slot in for people who either don't want to play or, we feel like is a better fit. And that's exactly what happened.
It's also the same for this year, too, because they did take the vast majority of that old rogue team, except neither of the tanks. But Sambo, you were saying?
No, I mean, anytime you can interrupt me with talking about Rogue, I'm fine with it. I'm a Rogue fanboy, so baguettes up, I'm ready to go. But no, going back to the South Korean roster in particular, I was just listening to you guys talk and thinking about the concept of snubs and who really didn't get in. And I was thinking everyone you mentioned, and there's probably 5 or 6 or 7 more names we could really pull out of each role that could start on most all the other World Cup teams over anyone else. So Korea is so deep that if they do anything short of win, or if they don't win, I'm sorry, if they fail, if they get second place or lower, I mean, I feel like they would be under extreme scrutiny by their fan base, especially with no tryout, to your guys' point. So this is a team that we look at this roster and say, well, we expect them to pretty much take this home. I've seen our power rankings behind the scene, and no spoilers, but I feel we're all pretty consistent on number 1 in the power rankings. And again, so it's this is the roster for them to drop the ball themselves and lose it on their own. But just the talent here is crazy. The people, Fisher in particular, I mean, that one hurts. That's again, one of my favorite players in the entire league. He's got swagger. He's got a personality to him, someone I want to see. But that's not why Korea is picking the players they want for the World Cup. It's not because of the personality or the popularity. They're doing it for the win. What's most strategic, what's most likely to get them success. And it's just so representative of their culture versus ours, where we will often sometimes lean personality and star status over raw talent. So anyway, kind of 9 points all mixed together in there. But essentially, it looks good, Totem. Loving it.
Absolutely. And, last week we kind of gave our predictions on the Team USA roster, and they actually did, like, a terrible live stream on the 4th of July, which was just an absolute crapshoot. But we do know who are going to be the final 12 that they will have to narrow down from. So, based off of the predictions that I gave last week, there were only 2 names that I didn't have, so let's quickly go over who they're going to narrow down from. So on the tank line, we have Muma from the Houston Outlaws. We have Space from the LA Valiant. McGravy, who is on Team Envy, formerly Envision Esports. We also have Super from the San Francisco Shock. For supports, we have Sleepy from the Shock. We have Elk from the Fusion University, Moth from the Shock, and Raucous from the Outlaws. And then our damage core, we have Sinatra, also from the Shock, Zachary from Fusion University, Hydration from the LA Gladiators, and Dante from the Shock. Okay, so we got... Seems like we're doing a little bit of a switch around, because last year, it was majority Houston Outlaws. This year, not so much. Now it's, Shock USA. I don't think there's anything really wrong with that, but looking at these names, like, there's a couple surprises. And I'd say the surprises more so aren't from the Overwatch League. I feel like the surprises more come out of the Path of Pro scene. Cause, like, what I would consider to be the best Widowmaker player from the United States isn't even mentioned. That being Bud, so I'm a little upset about that. But Zachary is more than likely going to get the nod and be our Widowmaker player for this year, which would be an absolute monster opportunity for him. But looking at these 12 players, do you guys have a strong feeling about who you think is going to be in that final 7-man roster for Team USA?
I'm with you. I think it's going to be Zachary Hydration for the DPS duo. They could go Sinatra Hydration or Sinatra Zachary if they really want to, throw a wrench in it, or stick to the old guns. It's kind of a little bit of both. I feel like you need Hydration because he brings so much versatility to that roster, and you need a good Widowmaker right now. And none of these other players, I think, are on the level that they need to be to compete with pretty much any of the other Widowmakers out there. I mean, you're going to be going against Soon. You're going to go against any of the 7 Koreans that can play Widowmaker, because I'm sure they all can at this point. So I'm really leaning Zachary Hydration right now, just based off of pure player pool. But we don't know the intangibles. We don't know team communication. We don't know how much Arrow is favoring Sinatra because of his past play, stuff like that. So DPS, I don't know. I feel like you're going to end up seeing Zachary on Widow. Tanks, I'm hoping for Super in Space. I mean, I like Muma. I think Muma's a really solid main tank, and I think it would still be Muma Space. But I want to see Super Space, just because both of those players are hyper versatile, and they could run any tank combination they want just from those 2 alone. But as long as they have Space, I don't really care who the main tank is, because that's who I lobbied for our last show, and that's who I'll lobby for this show. And supports, you're going to get Sleepy in someone. I mean, he's the best flex support you have. Sorry, Raucous fans, but Raucous, we've talked about him over and over again. He just wasn't really doing what you need to do on flex support right now. So,
other than that booty, he ain't bringing much to the bench.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry. I just had to jump in with that. But mostly because, point for point, name for name, Spider, like, I line up with you to a T on everything, even to the fact that it's Sleepy and either Elk or Moth. I really know that there's not as much synergy there. Their picks kind of, have some crossover, but I don't want it to be Raucous. I have more of a concern with putting Raucous out there than I do with any other player on that list. And I feel like at least I can look at those 4 and say, I'd like anyone but. And that might be bad, incorrect of me, because, Raucous is playing with the Houston Outlaws, and that's not the team that will be playing around Raucous. It's a different roster around him, which may affect his death count or affect his positioning or something, or the way they play. So if he ends up playing there, we're going to make the best of it. I'm going to go USA all day, wear my red, white, and blue. All right, I will support. But Spider, I agree with all the positives, but if I had to focus on something, it's like, let's avoid the raucous. Keep the booty on the bench.
There we go. He nailed it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it for me. He nailed all my points.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've all made it pretty abundantly clear our feelings just with overall performance that we've seen from Ruckus lately. So really, like, the biggest question mark is who is going to be playing the main support. Do you go with that already like the already synergy base thing that they have for the Shock and you run Sleepy and Moth, or do you bring in Elk, who has been the standout main support for most of the tier 2 scene, really, and he also brings that shot call-in mentality to the team. So, either way, like, I'm going to be happy with whatever support do we have. I would definitely prefer to have Elk in that role, because I feel like that shot calling capability would maybe outweigh what Moth can bring. Not to say that Moth is a bad choice, but I want to see more tier 2 representation on Team USA, and our likeliest bets for that are with Zachary and Elk, because I don't think McGravy is going to be in the discussion. I don't know if I would have had him in, like, my top 5 picks for just, like, overall tanks, because obviously, we also had Gods that wasn't really in the mix either. But all in all, like, I think we're all pretty much in line with who we think will make the final 7, so it's just a toss-up between the main supports. But that being said, obviously, we have some pretty big names kind of across the different countries, and, I think we'll probably all be on the same page, too, when we feel who's going to be the biggest competition for Team USA. Obviously, South Korea's number 1. Maybe not number 1 in our hearts, but number 1 in our heads. I mean, it's a safe bet. But are there any other countries out there that you think will really rival Team USA this year?
I mean, the first one that jumps to mind is the second place team from last year, Canada. And they've put up a pretty strong showing in scrims. Coaching staff seems to be there. The actual roster seems very good. So Canada would probably be my pick for the next closest competition to Korea outside of the United States.
I mean, it's tough. I guess, I was going to say Canada as well, but just to be diverse, I think Finland can really surprise some people too. I think that's a roster that, they just have a lot of solid talent, a lot of veteran leadership, and a lot of, star-studded DPS. So they're a team that has some potential, but it's tough.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because, like, every year with the World Cup, like, we always have those detractors when it comes to Team USA. Everyone just assumes, like, they're just going to shit the bed, they're not going to go very far, and obviously, we drew South Korea last year. Hopefully we don't fall into similar circumstances this year, but who do you guys think would be, like, the biggest X factor in regards to Team USA? I know we don't have the final 7 yet, but is there any one player in particular that you feel is going to be maybe the glue that kind of holds everything together for Team USA?
Space. I've only talked about him this whole time, so I'm gonna go Space. He can do some wonders on that off tank position, and off tanks only getting more and more important as the league goes on. So he's my X factor. If he can punish the enemy team the way he needs to on, whether he's playing Diva or Zarya or Hog or possibly Hamster, who knows? So I think Space can really put the fear into the enemy teams.
I think Zachary can be the American Pine, the great white American Pine. You know what I mean? There's that potential that we, right now it's a Widow dominant patch, but that's right now. I really don't know what it's going to be like when the World Cup hits. But if it is Widow and she's around and prevalent, we just have that opportunity to have that star created, that person who carried us to victory, similar to how I feel Pine beat the USA. I remember that Hanamura map, and Pine single-handedly killed them on the first point, the second attempt, which changed everything. So
he meant Flower, but I know what you meant.
Oh my god, dude! Did I say that the whole time, dude? Flower. Oh my gosh! Thank you for knowing what I
Yes.
meant. I mean, you know, I knew. You knew. Oh,
I know that you knew. Yeah, I know.
that is so embarrassing. I will take that bullet though. Oh, all right. I'll take it. I earned that. Sorry, Toad. I'm gonna
Yeah,
let you
I
down,
mean,
brother.
to be fair, Flowers under back to Nanohana again. Because I think it might be an issue with, Overwatch League player names not wanting to have, numbers in the name.
100%.
So there is that, but, we'll definitely talk about Flower or Nanohana when we get closer to, Season 2 of the Overwatch League. But let's go ahead and jump into our main discussion for this week, which is basically an overview of all of the Overwatch League playoff teams. We'll then go on to preview the two quarterfinal matches. So first up, let's talk about, the top seed, that being the New York Excelsior. So Spider, it's been kind of a, well, it was a whirlwind fourth stage for the NYXL, all narratives aside, but this has been, without question, the most consistent team that we've had. They've made it to the stage finals, pretty much all the way through. So what are we looking at in regards to NYXL? Like, what are their strengths? What are their supposed weaknesses? Who's going to be that X factor for this team to lead them to victory in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, we gotta start with the number one seed. It has to be NYXL. So let's get the easy one out of the way. I mean, they're the team that averaged 1.5 losses per stage over the season, and most of that was because of stage 4 due to some less than optimal play, I guess we'll put it. So to go into their strengths, it's pretty much they're the most well-rounded team we've seen in the league. They can adjust to any meta. Their DPS core with Sabiobi, because Bob always yells at me because I say it wrong, and Libero can play pretty much any DPS duo that they want. And going into the playoffs, it's only going to get stronger. I mentioned this in previous shows, but Libero actually came to prevalence because of his Hanzo play back when Hanzo was considered a throw pick. So now that he is actually going to be meta, Libero is going to be very scary. And SBB can play Brigitte. He can play Tracer. He's actually been playing a lot of Widow recently. And he's been very vocal that he doesn't like Widow, but he's also very good at Widow. So use that rage to fill it. And then, they also have Pine to slot in there if they really need, Spider Pine on certain maps. So this is a well-rounded DPS core. And, I can't not talk about the support line as well. So between Arc and Jonak, they are probably the most fearsome support line. And I think that is their biggest strength. And that actually is a discredit to the rest of the team because the rest of the team is not a weakness. Like when I talk about the Gladiators later, I can pinpoint specific weaknesses. But as far as strengths go, we know what Jonak can do. He's been the story of the season, so I'm not going to touch on Jonak other than we know what Jonak can do. Arc is like the X factor for this team because he just stays alive through any situation, and as long as Arc is alive, the rest of the team is alive. So as long as Arc can do what he needs to do, he is that X factor that will help this team go forward in victory. If I had to touch on weaknesses, I actually had to go back and watch the Valiant play them in the stage 4 finals. And I kind of pinpointed the one area weakness that could have been attributed to fatigue at that point, but it's actually Meko. Meko, in their off-tank position, whenever he folded, the rest of the team actually scattered. And that's when the team kind of lost its cohesion, because that's kind of where New York does so well is Arc supports Jonak, and then Jonak supports the tanks, and then the tanks make room for the DPS. The problem was when Meko folded, they scattered, and they couldn't do that. And that's actually where Valiant picked them apart. So most teams would say probably focus down Jonak, when I think you should take a more ground and pound approach and just break down their front line, and then, systematically dismantle the rest of the team. and I'm reaching when I say that. Like, you have to be perfect when you do that, because the rest of the team will easily mow you over. Like I said, weaknesses for New York were tough. And sandbagging discussion aside, I do think this meta impacted them a little more in stage 4. Unfortunately, I think any impact that meta would have had is going to be rectified as soon as Hanzo comes into play, because they're just going to get just that strong again. That's how I feel about New York. And I kind of wanted to touch on like storylines and stuff like that, like their season, but they were the part of other teams' storylines. Like, they were the team that the teams tried to beat. So there wasn't a huge grudge match. There wasn't like a battle for LA. There wasn't anything like that for New York. New York just came in. They won 9 out of 10 games, except for stage 4. And then, at 2 out of 3 stages took home the championship. And, in the 4th stage and the 1st stage, they took up runner-up. So, there is no storyline for New York other than we expect them to win. If they don't win, it will actually be a large upset. And with that, I still think they're going to finish first. Like, I hate to say it, I would love to see it upset, but I think the playoff structure does not afford the chance for an upset just because of the multiple rounds of 5. It's going to be hard to pull off an upset twice on New York. So we'll see.
Yeah, for me, like, looking at New York, at least the storyline that I would bring is the fact that, this core roster was from Luxury Watch Blue, which was one of the South Korean teams that was always kind of playing, like, third, fourth fiddle to some of the other powerhouse Korean teams, and they've already kind of gone out of the gate and outlasted some of those powerhouse teams that were definitely at, their peak at that time. So that's really like the biggest turnaround. So this team has already, surpassed the prior expectations from what they had as LW Blue. So for them to already walk away with multiple stage titles is an absolute success for this team. And, they've only racked up, couple $100,000. I can't remember the exact total. It was a lot, obviously, because they won 2 stage titles, and also definitely, New York is poised to dominate, really. And yeah, absolutely, Libero on the Hanzo is probably gonna have the biggest impact out of all of the new players being brought on for that role, anyways. Because for one, he was already kind of practicing and just refamiliarizing himself with that role. And yes, it's going to be different, but without question, he should be the best Hanzo in the league for the playoffs. But let's talk about that other team that you did mention, and that was our number 2 seed in the Los Angeles Valiant. So Slambo, this is our first of 2 LA teams. What is it about the Valiant that has stood out to you throughout the season? Who do you think is going to make the biggest impact for this team?
So when I think about the Valiant, I think of a team that has gone through a lot of changes, right? A lot of teams in the league, yes, certainly have gone through a lot of changes, but this is a roster that's been able to maintain success while doing that. And that is what makes them very unique. So I kind of want to start with that and kind of call out their strength, is that this is a team that appeared to find the right roster at the right time. They clearly showed that they're capable. They dethroned the Kings at the end of stage 4, which just made for an all more exciting storyline going into the finals now. I do agree with Spider that the New York Excelsior is still the team to beat, not just numerically, statistically, but, and that from that psychological perspective too. And even though they did get that victory, they still have a lot to prove. So the strength, again, is I think that kind of 6 core roster we saw in most of that matchup: Soon, Agilities, Fate, Space, Custa, and Karif. That appears to be nice. Space coming in at the right time, fitting in perfectly, almost kind of catching them up a little bit in a little bit of that tank play. So overall, that to me is their strength, is like the current synergy they found on this roster right now. But if I'm going to call out a weakness, and I don't want to, this hurts me, Totem, to say this, but I feel like Soon possibly can be looked at as a weakness on this team. And again, it's like tough because when he plays well, he can really win a lot of duels. He shows up on the Widow and the Tracer very well. But when Soon is off his game, he almost just is invisible at times. And they cannot afford to have any of that, especially heading in to the playoffs, even though they do have a bye, per se. But so Soon to me, see how that hurts Totem? Like, just to give them love and then to say that, it hurts me. But, okay. The X Factor player, without question, I kind of mentioned him showing up at the right time, but Space just what else can be said? We see him on the Overwatch, Team USA World Cup roster, and we're all not only celebrating it, we're begging that he stays there. It is not just a star power thing, because his personality is not larger than life. He hasn't been making a name for himself, like kind of up until his appearance. He just boom popped, and he just was a star by his play. I always joke, I always say this thing, I always say, when people will talk smack to me and I haven't said a word, I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, was I playing too loud?" I love that for Space, because like he just plays loud for me. And obviously the storyline, I kind of integrated it in there, Totem, is that this idea that they did get that victory, that vaunted victory over the New York Excelsior, and it meant something. Certainly some money was on the line, but this is for all the marbles. So can they do it when the stakes are higher and the spotlight is bigger than it ever was, and that viewer count is setting records for us? That is when it's going to matter, and we'll see if they can produce. And I'm sure cheering for them. And the forecast, I certainly think it's going to be them in New York in the final. But I guess we'll save most of our predictions for later. But if I'm giving it a forecast, Totem, it's sunny with a lightly cloudy.
All right, well, let's talk about that number 3 seed in the Boston Uprising. So, this has been a very curious team, because I feel like, Boston has kind of gone through every sort of phase that you could go through. Kind of going into the season, this was a team that a lot of the community had as bottom tier just because of the names that were involved on this roster. Maybe not being, like, bigger names out there in the esports scene for Overwatch. And, they basically went from, being, like, considered to be the worst team on paper, worse than, everyone else, to being the only team to have a perfect stage, barring, that their playoff for that stage, but that's another point altogether, to being one of the least consistent teams later, in stage 4. So I think, like, out of all of the playoff teams, I think Boston, to me, is kind of the hardest one to pin down. Like, they're, like, the question mark. Like, I don't really know quite what to expect from Boston, and I don't know what that's going to mean. But what I will see is, like, despite their struggles in Stage 4, at least they did end on a high note. It took them a while to kind of understand the Brigitte meta, but they won their last 4 matches. They beat the Seoul Dynasty, they beat Shanghai Dragons, which, I mean, so did everyone else, but that's besides the point. But they beat New York. I mean, that was a huge deal, and they also beat Florida Mayhem. So if I'm looking at Boston, I think, like, their strengths really lie in kind of the team discipline and the strategy. This team was built around being a very coachable team. They have a lot of individuality of ability. And I think that really stands true, especially with both of their Zenyatta players on that roster in Neko and AimGod. If I'm looking at team weaknesses, like, for me, like, I hate to say it, but, like, I don't look at their DPS duo as star caliber. Striker had been one of the better Tracer players in the league, maybe top 5, but Mistakes has kind of fallen silent. He got off to a great start, initially, given the whole DK situation that went down, and, Mistake stepped up really big. It was a lot to kind of take in for him, but he's definitely seen his fair share of struggles lately, and knowing that we're going to be playing on this new patch, neither Mistakes or Striker has really been prominent or proficient in Hanzo, so, like, I don't know how exactly they're going to fit in this new double sniper meta, or if they're just going to try to go back to running full dive. So that being said, if I'm talking about an X factor for Boston, for me it's Aim God. I feel like Boston does their best when they have that survivability on the back line. And, there were moments where their back line would die early, but as soon as Aim God was brought into that roster, that's really been nullified. Maybe not completely, but it's been a stronger point for this team. And he also has brought a lot of aggression to that back line. So, like, if I'm predicting, how Boston is going to do in the playoffs, I'm not feeling super confident. But I will say this. Knowing that we're switching from Reinhardt and Zarya tank duos, that is going to mean that we will see the return of Winston. And Gamzu, without question, did a lot better on the Winston role than the Reinhardt role. So I feel like, with him getting that much playtime on that, they'll be able to find their footing again. But the question mark is on the DPS duo being adaptable to this new meta, and for that, I don't know. But this is a team that has a very good work mentality that was instilled, not only from Huck, but from Kraft. So I don't feel like this is a team that we can necessarily sleep on, but it's really hard to kind of see like where they are going to land right now. This is a hard one to kind of pin down, and I'm not going to be completely shocked if they are able to, maybe make their way out of the quarterfinals, but, I don't think it's surefire like I could say about some of the other teams. So, really, they're the big question mark for me. But we got to talk about the other LA team in the LA Gladiators. So, we have the Valiant, we have the Gladiators. We've gone through multiple Battle of LAs. So, Spider, what is it about the Gladiators that has stood the test of time this season?
Fisher. Next question. No, I mean, actually, the last week when they played Seoul, they played without Fisher and still looked like a very good team. So it seems like Fisher brought a level of just consistency to the team that the team was able to carry over and carry into their game with iRemix that we didn't see when iRemix was in the roster the first time. So starting with their strengths, just like everyone else, it's going to be Fisher. I mean, he clearly makes the room that this team needs to operate, both Surefour and Hydration, and even though we didn't really see him stage 4, Asher, need a lot of room to operate. They're very capable DPS, but they seem to kind of fold under pressure, which is, if you go back and watch any of the Gladiators' losses, that's where their losses come from, is, the DPS gets pressured and, it just folds from there. So as long as Fisher's doing what he needs to do, along with Bishu, because I think Bishu's probably the other strength, is Bishu's kind of been the underrated diva player throughout the league. Like, he's popped up here and there, and people are like, "Oh, Diva's, Bishu's Diva's really good." And we've always heard about like his communication and stuff like that behind the scenes, but he was never really that standout player. Like, he wasn't like, he was tearing it up, but people were still talking about Mickey's Brigida or Siegel's Diva or stuff like that. Where Bishu has been consistently good. Like, I would put Bishu in the top 3 the whole season. He was covering for iRemix during the first stage, and he's just paired well with Fisher ever since. So I think their biggest strength is their front line. Now, going into their weakness, I mean, I mentioned their DPS, but their biggest weakness is clearly their back line. Like, Shaz and Big Goose are just too inconsistent. Big Goose, when he's playing well, is one of the more survivable mercies. The problem is that's like 1 out of every 4 games. And that's not going to fly in the playoffs. Shaz has also been very streaky. At times, he's been called the second Jonak. On other times, he's basically been a non-factor. So I think the X factor is going to be Shaz. It has to be. If this team wants to make a playoff run, Shaz is going to need to step up, and he's going to need to do what other flex support players are doing. Maybe not to the level of Jonak, where you're raising the league average, but at least to the level that he's a factor into the game. And I think with that, that'll kind of pass down to Big Goose, and Big Goose will be able to play better. And, this has been one of the best teams to talk about this whole season. again because of Fisher. But when we saw them in stage 1, they were kind of a middle of the road team. iRemix had a lot of problems jumping in and dying. Kind of the same thing we saw similar to one of the next teams we're going to talk about with Fraggy. But Fraggy reined it in. He changed his play style a little and adapted. iRemix never got the chance to do that. Instead, they brought in Fisher, and Fisher just revitalized this whole team. And when Fisher came in, it brought along this great revenge storyline, which we've seen play out every time they've played London. And that's the first match in the playoffs is, Gladiators versus London. So this is going to be Fisher's moment to really stick it to his former team. And during the last match, he kind of had that quote where he said, "Do you regret trading me yet?" And this is going to be the moment where he can kind of accentuate that. And I think that is the biggest storyline going into this team. You can talk about, how Surefour has improved and become one of the best Widow v Widow players. You can talk about how Hydration plays Doomfist more than any other player, and he's actually very good at it. But I think it really comes down to Fisher versus London. And if they could beat London, then it's a different discussion. It's like, can they beat the next team? And that's where I'm going to stop. Like, I have some thoughts, but I want to focus on this London game first, which we will absolutely talk about later.
Yeah, just don't run the 303, please, Gladiators. That still hurts. It still hurts. But let's talk about that number 5 seed in the London Spitfire. So if I'm looking at this team strengths, I'd have to go with Fury and, of course, the backline. So Nusk Closer and Bedosin have been, I think, probably the most consistent bright spot on this team. And depending on who you may ask, Fury is either, the best diva in a league, or he's kind of like the unsung hero on the Spitfire core. So, I also think, when they are run and dive, Gesture and Prophet are definite standouts in regards to the Winston Tracer pairings in the league. And I think they can go up against, the other best teams, even New York at times. If I'm looking at weaknesses, we have to touch on Control, because Control maps have been the kryptonite of the London Spitfire, and this playoff map pool is not doing them any favors either. But outside of that, lately it's more been in regards to ill-timed ultimates and just team cohesion. It's been an issue, honestly, ever since Stage 3. This was one of the hottest teams in Stage 1 and Stage 2, and then things happened. And, we've since then seen them make some roster changes. They moved 4 players to inactive, and, eventually did release them, and they all found new homes, which is great. But if I'm talking about the X Factor, it has got to be Fury. He is the difference maker for London, as a lot of their play is worked behind the aggression of not only Fury, but Bedosian. So Fury can easily turn the tides, and we know that we're going to be seeing a ton of Hanzo. We'll likely be seeing a ton of Zarya still for the Space Dragons, and, Fury's going to be the guy. He is going to have to rely on that defense matrix management, and, just Eden one ultimate is enough to really make a huge impact, in any series, basically. So I think Fury's definitely going to be the guy that you're going to be looking at to kind of be the backbone of that team. But, London has... they went from being, considered to be, a top 3 team in the Overwatch League before, the league even started. They started strong by defeating New York in the Stage 1 finals, and they looked to repeat only to drop a Map 5 against Philadelphia Fusion in the Stage 2 finals. And since then, London just hasn't been able to live up to that early success that they've had. And... despite all of their shortcomings in Stage 3 and Stage 4, they do have one of the better map differentials in the league, at least the best out of, any non-division winning team. But they're also going to be dealing with that, home crowd of the LA Gladiators in the quarterfinals, so it's definitely interesting. So, in regards to a forecast, I think a lot of this is going to be based on the front line of London. the London tank line has had one of the highest survivabilities out of all of the playoff teams, and that should allow Fury to have plenty of opportunities to make his impact. They're really going to have to rely on that aggression, both on the front and the back line. But at the end of the day, adaptability is going to be key. If London is if they're going to be able to make a deep run in the playoffs, they need to get off to an early lead because that control map is map number 2 in these series. So they really need to come out with a win if they're going to get ahead of here, because at that point, there's a good chance that they will be fighting an uphill battle, especially if they drop map 1. So it's going to be hard to turn around if they can't get their feet underneath them early on in these series. So that's a definite thing to keep an eye out for, which would bring us to the 6th and final team of the playoffs, that being the Philadelphia Fusion. So Slambo, we've seen some changes in regards to the tank line. Obviously, Wasato having served his suspension for the first 3 stages. Fraggy's kind of dialed it back a little bit. We've seen some really damn good DPS out of this core. I mean, Carpe has just been lighting people up. I mean, there's a lot to like about Fusion, but there's still, a lot to be concerned about too, just due to some inconsistencies. So, looking at Fusion, what are we looking at in regards to the playoffs?
I don't mean to parrot you, but I will say that was my strength, is the DPS lineup. The DPS core of this roster is really where the stars are. And Carpe in particular has been so consistently good. I think back to that cheesy "This is how we do it in Philly" video, which was awful, but it really did show the confidence that organization had in Carpe early on, and he truly is proven to be one of the best players in the Overwatch League, and has a well-deserved spot on a very tough to be on Korean Overwatch World Cup roster. So really, to me, that DPS lineup around Carpe is great. I'll always enjoy me some Shadowburn. I'm going to come back and touch on someone else here in a second. As far as their weakness goes, I try to look at this roster, and you've mentioned the tank lineup, the support. You try to pick apart the supports, and it's tough to do. So really, what I was looking at when I looked at this team is their weakness is maybe the map type. They are not that great on Escort and Assault. They have a 33% win rate on Escort and a 47% win rate on Assault. Here's 3 maps that are in the pool, and again, I understand that these can be banned and shuffled around. They may not play on some of these matches, but here's some records for you. Kings Row 1-4, Volskaya 0-3, Junkertown 0-5. So if those maps are played, they're definitely, at least psychologically, in a bit of a disadvantage, knowing they don't have a great record, or they're picking around those maps, assuming they have confidence. Again, that can put a team into a trap where they're overthinking their own picks. So this is going to be a challenge for them to overcome. So certainly this is something they need to keep in mind. I'm sure they're probably practicing that, looking at that. The coaching staff is making sure they address some of those issues possibly, because those maps, again, are in the pool. So let's keep those in mind, and let's see how they perform. But certainly something to keep our eye on. X Factor, I was saving this because he does fall into that DPS lineup, but that's EQO. A player who's kind of been a lot more versatile this patch than he's ever been. I've seen him playing more heroes, including the Brigitte, quite a bit in some different lineups. And so I just think that this is an important patch to have that versatility. And he does bring that X factor, high level skill, and he is a very high energy dynamic player as well. So definitely has to be the X factor for the Philadelphia Fusion. And storyline. You're going to ask me to tell you what the storyline is for this team when they're from Philadelphia and they're at the bottom. They're the last seed. They barely made it in. This is Rocky's story if you ever saw it. This is their chance to climb their way up the ranks, to beat the bad guys, and show everybody that they can do this. This team has been so inconsistent, up and down. They've really just kind of been in the middle most of the time. They made it to the stage playoffs in stage 2, and they took New York to a game 5. Mind you, by the start of stage 3, we were having conversations, was Philadelphia a top 3 team? We were like really impressed by them at the end of that stage. And then they just were kind of 500 pretty much for the rest of the two stages, and they didn't make it to any of the playoffs. So, in essence, I just think that this team, we really don't know which is going to show up, the middle of the pack or this world beater, but I'm cheering for that Rocky story. And the forecast totem, flip a coin, brother. We'll call this one sink or swim. We're either talking sunshine, it looks beautiful, they have the greatest story that's ever come, or they're the Shanghai Dragons of the playoffs. See you later.
Yeah, and that's a scary thought because, Philadelphia has been one of the brawliest teams out there. But let's go ahead and talk about those quarterfinal matches. So, just as a reminder, those kick off this Wednesday. That is July 11th. So, at 5 p.m. Pacific time, we'll have the Philadelphia Fusion going up against the Boston Uprising. And then at 7 p.m. Pacific time, we will have the London Spitfire going up against the LA Gladiators. And over the weekend, on Friday, we'll finish up the series between Philadelphia and Boston, with Saturday being London and the Gladiators. So just as a reminder for the format, each series is a best of 3, with each match being a best of 5 maps. So let's talk about that first one. We got the Fusion, we got Uprising. Fusion, as Lambo noted, kind of skated in at the last minute. They needed some definite help to secure that final spot, and Boston is kind of, for a while, we would say, Boston was really limping in, but, they did win out their final 2 weeks. But when we look at the series throughout the regular season, these two teams have been pretty even. They split the series. They are 2-2 against one another. Fusion did take the last series that was 3-1 back in Stage 4, Week 1. Both of these teams have earned a sweep over the other, so they've both been a part of it and also been victim to it. So it's really, this one really is a close one to call. So when we're looking at this series, Spider, which matchup in particular are you looking at? Is one line, a clear standout, opposed to the others?
It's going to come down to tank line. I think this is 100% going to come down to tank line. If Sato can bully Gamsu, then I think there's not going to be much that Boston can do about it. And I actually give the edge to whichever Philly tank they decide to run. I think Fraggy's aggression will take them off guard, and I think Sato just has the play to run laps around Boston currently. As many misgivings as I have about Philly in Stage 4, those are almost doubled for Boston. All the areas that Philly struggled in, Boston struggled in more. So I don't think a meta shift is enough to fix that for either one of these teams. So I feel like we're going to see very similar teams to what we saw in Stage 4. Whereas in our next matchup, I can make an argument one way or the other based on, what I know the players are capable of. So I think as long as Philadelphia's tank line does what it needs to do, they're going to take Boston in 2 games. Well, 2 sets.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to argue with that. But I just want to make note, even with the meta shift, neither one of these sides has a prominent Hanzo player either. So that's definitely worth weighing in as well.
Exactly.
Definitely. And then my last thing is, I certainly am scared of Boston only because I doubt them so hard right now. I do think that Philadelphia is a team that can definitely win this matchup. It's nice, again, in their favor rather than some of the other matchups they could have landed here with the seeding. But I don't know. Every time I doubt Boston so confidently, I'm so certain that they're going to lose a match, is when they usually ruin my picks or my weekend. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant. Everything on paper says Philadelphia has a damn good shot. I think you nailed it with the tank lineup matchup. But I'm nervous, guys. I don't know.
Yeah, to me, I have this one going all 3 sets. I am going to give the nod to Philadelphia in this case, but, Boston has just been one of those teams that, at least Stage 1 and Stage 2, they were flying under the radar. They started to rack up wins. The dive meta was very prominent, and they ended up being, probably, the best dive team in the league. And Since then we've seen a little bit of fall off, but like if we're looking at the map pool, we do have Volskaya Industries. So if Boston does fall behind and they bring it to Volskaya, that definitely gives them a window back into the series overall. But I would definitely expect some heavy punches being thrown on both sides. And, with the regular season being tied, you can pretty much expect this just to go the distance. But it's really going to be a matter of, okay, yes, the frontline battle is going to be important, but I don't know if the Boston DPS duo is going to be able to measure up to what Carpe is going to bring, just because we know the level of consistency that Carpe will bring. Now, if we go like 5 maps in all of these series, there always is that chance that maybe we will see a little bit of fall off from Carpe, just because he has been kind of prone to that in the past. But it's super hard for me to be like super confident right now in Boston, just knowing that yes, Gamzu will be back on the Winston, but how much is that actually going to elevate that team as a whole? Just knowing that DPS duo of Boston hasn't really lived up to the early success that it's had. I feel like they just haven't been able to rebound after that first stage, after, the whole DK situation, because they just haven't been able to reproduce that early success that they did have.
I don't know. Not much else to add.
Yeah.
I just was going to remind you, Totem, that you kept talking about your concern or you're leaning towards Philadelphia, and it just made my concern that Boston's going to stomp them, go up and up. I don't know why. I'm sorry. That's all I can really say.
That's been our luck this season. I remember, what was it, stage 3, when I was like, oh, Boston's on the decline, and people called me out, and then they didn't lose a match. So that's our luck. I mean, I say Philly will take this easy, and they'll probably lose it in 2. Who knows?
Okay, so let's get it on a record. What will be, the series score of this one? It is a best of 3 overall series. I mentioned, like, mine is going 2-1 in favor of the Fusion, and, if we all pick Fusion, we might see a different result.
I'm going 2-0 Fusion. I'll stick with what I said earlier.
Sambo?
What? I think I had a lag spike.
Oh, what do you have as the final set score for this series?
Okay. For this series, oh gosh, I spent all this time deciding whether Boston was going to win or not. I really, I don't know. What did you guys pick?
Philly.
I wanted what?
Philly.
Well, we both
for the score. Sorry,
he had it 2-0. I had it 2-1.
2-1. Not to match you, Totem. I just feel like it will be a little bit of back and forth. It will be, as far as the series go, it'll be a little closer than we think it will be. I don't think it's a blowout either way. So that's why I think at least one map for each team. One series for each team.
I like how you said not to match you, but no matter what, you'd be matching someone. I mean, there's
no.
a couple ways.
I actually say that because, like, in the pick'ems, it felt like we would match each other so much. Right. That's all. Yeah, that's the only reason I said you. That's why. Sorry.
All right. Well, let's talk about that other quarterfinals match between London Spitfire and the LA Gliders. Okay, so on paper, kind of looking back at this series, this has been dominated by the LA Gliders, including the preseason. So regular season, this series was 3-0 in favor of the Gladiators, and Gladiators also took, the battle in the preseason, but, that was a long time ago. Those are 2 completely different teams. But the last time these 2 teams played was in Stage 4, Week 2, and the Gladiators took that one in 5 maps. That one was 3-2 in favor of LA. But really, what's interesting about this one is that, 2 of the 3 matches that they have played has gone the distance here. They have gone on map 5s, and, even if you include the preseason, that would bump that number up 1. So the majority of the times that these 2 teams play one another, it goes to a map 5. So, we've always, hyped up Fisher and the impact that he has had. But, London's tank core has also been able to match him. I don't know so much on, like, the main tank role, but off-tank-wise, I honestly would give the nod to Fury in this case, but, you know, London has kind of like fallen off a little bit. Gladiators were one of the hotter teams in Stage 4. So with that in mind, like, how do you guys think this one is going to kind of unfold? Like, do you give the nod to the Gladiators knowing that they have had, kind of London's number, throughout the entirety of the season?
Spider, let me jump in real quick because
Go,
my
buddy.
point is in direct response and not very astute. And Totem, I think that is as simple as this matchup comes down to. Because it's not just about in the past, they've had their number. Okay, I get that. But right now, the trajectory of these teams could not be more polar opposite. This nice uptick for the Gladiators and this momentous lack of confidence downtick for the Spitfire. I think that's your recipe right there. And we had way higher expectations for London when we saw this roster at the start of the year. So for them to back into fifth place, it really is pretty shocking. So sorry, I wanted to agree with Totem.
No, I fully agree. I think these two teams will put up a show just because of how close the previous matches has been. But it seems like the London coaching staff isn't quite there since Bishop was removed, left, whatever happened. It seems like ever since that happened, they started doing the shuffle, and then they never quite got their bearings. And then they actually had to actively come out and bench/release players to even get a core roster to do it. So it just seems like London doesn't quite know what to do with their star power, because on paper, sure, Gladiators have Fisher and they have Surefour and they have Hydration, all very talented players. But when you look at the players on London, all these players statistically are much better than the Gladiators. So it seems like as a team, they are just misfiring. So I actually will give the edge to the Gladiators. I feel like this one may go 2-1 just because all the games have been close so far. But a 2-0 for the Gladiators isn't out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, this one, like, I'm so conflicted on this one because I felt like knowing that London kind of narrowed it down to that final 7, that we would have seen a bigger turnaround for that roster, but we didn't really see that, Prophet was kind of, I'm not going to say forced onto the Brigitte role, but he was one of the better Brigittes that we have seen in the league. But, I feel like when we're looking at London, Birdrain has... I don't think Birdrain has really lived up to the expectations that a lot of us would have had for him, knowing the amount of flexibility that he has had. And, I feel like Fisher is going to make just such a huge difference in this particular match. And, I know it's been fairly one-sided, and maybe London can, land some, good punches along the way. But with the way that the Gladiators have just kind of... I'm not going to say force their will on the Spitfire, that'd just be bad terminology, but they've definitely had, they've been on the better end of what's been received. Like, every time that they go into a series, Fisher has kind of been at the front and center. He's been bowling in the frontline battle, and it's allowed the Gladiators DPS to really put in, just the final touches for that team. And with Spitfire, like... let's say, like, even if we are entering, the double sniper meta, if Prophet has to play the Brigitte, then I don't know how London is going to do, just because then at that point they are going to be running, a 2-tank, triple support with the Widowmaker player, and Birdrain just hasn't been bringing it in my eyes. So, like, for me, like, London is going to live and die based on how Birdrain is going to be able to perform in this series, and knowing what Surefour has done, just over the course of the season, and he has improved a lot on that role, being one of the more consistent Widow versus Widow players in the league. But, I would definitely give him the nod against Birdrain right now, but, there are times where Birdrain shows up, and looks like he's one of the best DPS players in the league, and then there are times where he just kind of just vanishes, or goes invisible, as Lambo would put it. So, I don't know what to think. But I will say this, like, looking at the other... like, if I look at the support line, without question, I give the nod to London. We've seen a lot more consistency on that line for that team compared to what we've gotten from Shaz and Big Goose. So, if there is, like one specific line that really could turn things for London, it would be off the back of the support duo.
I just want to weigh in and say that hydration, he seems, again, I mentioned that he does well. I'm sorry, he has been very versatile, or I think you guys mentioned that earlier. But he seems to do better when the rest of the league is also in that position of having to be versatile. He almost seems to adapt pretty quickly, like a Ryu J Hong will. Like he'll adapt pretty quick to characters and to metas. And I think that there's been a little bit of lag time that will bring that gap a little closer in this matchup. So again, it won't be like a complete destruction on the side of Gladiators over the Spitfire. It will be close, but we will see that gap shortened a little bit. Hydration may come a little bit down to earth, not to be a fair reference. And I think that we will see a better matchup, but I can definitely see this going 2-0 for the Gladiators, but like that second series being so close and could have gone either way. Like it was about to go 1-1 and go to the next series. I could see that happening, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I touched on it earlier, but I feel like London has the weapons that it needs to easily win this match. It's just how they properly utilize them. And I think that's really what sets New York apart from London is New York has figured out how to use what it has effectively, whereas London never quite figured that out. And they're going into the playoffs not really having practiced that on stage. Sure, they have scrim time. They've been practicing their collective asses off by this point. But I don't know. I feel like as a team, the Gladiators just gel better. And the type of meta that we're in now, it's highly dependent on team play. Whereas individual standouts may have their moments, like Fisher will have his moment, our Prophet may have his moment, our Birdring may pop off, but that doesn't dictate a multi-match series. And that's kind of what the playoffs are bringing to this. And I touched on it in my New York point. It's going to be the most consistent team that's going to win. And London, while it has its moments, especially over recently, it hasn't been consistent. So I just, I give the nod to the Gladiators overall. So I'm going to say 2-1 Gladiators. I guess just to counterpoint the London argument.
Yeah, for me, like, I want to believe so much in London. I follow that GC Busan core when they were still all on all a thing, not so much because, the whole roster dissolve. But like you brought up, like, we haven't really seen like that team effort being brought from London, and absolutely, like, I feel like team cohesion wise, they just haven't been at that level. Yes, they have all of the pieces, but they haven't been able to put all those pieces together. And the Gladiators really were, I'm not gonna say like they were like above the rest of the pack, but like when you compare them to some of these other teams in the playoffs, they are on the better side of things. Compare them to some of the other teams like London, or Boston, and and a lot of the other teams. So like I want London to do well. Do I think they'll take at least one of these series against LA? I'm leaning towards no. I think the Gladiators will be able to take this one 2-0, but I expect to see a Met 4 in probably the first series that we see, but I think the second series will go to a Met 5, but I still think the Gladiators will come out ahead overall. So, Slambo, that leads us over to you. Like, how do you see this one, taking shape? Like, who are you going for?
Yeah, I think I already jumped the gun there on that one earlier, but this will go towards the Gladiators. For a number of reasons, everything you guys have kind of mentioned and we've talked about, I just feel like they're going to have the edge. It's not necessarily as much of a gap as I could see with some other potential matchups, but unfortunately, I just feel like the edge goes to Gladiators in almost all categories. And I'll be cheering for the Gladiators. They're my little brother's team. I think I mentioned that before. So my little brother Mason, he is a Gladiators fan. He likes the purple. He likes the shields up. So, my team's eliminated. So it's basically like all I got in the family.
But, quick side note, if you are a Gladiators fan, I do know that they did open up a new shop here very recently, so definitely go check that out. You might be able to find the link on their official website. I'm sure it's there. So, shields up, grab all your gear and whatnot for the playoffs, and, you're probably not going to be able to get it in time for, Wednesday's game, but you'll still have time to have it for the playoffs. I mean, yeah, you definitely can overnight it. But that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best ways to do that is to leave us a positive review over on iTunes. We're always looking for ways to help improve the show and make for a better listening experience for you. We do have our podcast directory, Overwatch Recall. You can find that on our website. So you can find a list of all the Overwatch League, and Path to Pro podcasts and content out there. And every Sunday we do post our weekly recalls, which you can also find on our website, which will just show whatever content was released that prior week. But Spider, why don't you go ahead and let our listeners know where they can get a hold of our podcast and our community on the social media.
Sure. If you'd like to contact us via email, it is contact@owlnshow.com. Our Twitter, Instagram, and website are OWLN Show. You can find us on YouTube. It is just Overwatch League Network. Like I said, we have some Hammond stuff coming up, so look forward to that. You can find our Discord at discord.me/OWLN Show. If you're listening via audio, you can find our Twitch page and watch us live, or the VODs if you can't catch us live, at twitch.tv/OWLN Show. We have 3 primary shows, and then we also do host streams. We have our main show, which is what you're currently listening to, which is Monday nights at 7 p.m. PDT. It is Overwatch League Network. We have our variety Overwatch show where we talk about everything Overwatch, which is Heroes Never Die. That is Wednesdays at 5 p.m. PDT. And then we also have our Tier 2 Path to Pro Contenders show Thursdays at 7 p.m. PDT, which is the back cap. I generally host a stream Friday nights starting around 7:30 PDT. I do comp. I do pretty much whatever I'm feeling like that week, PTR or whatever. And then Totem hosts a stream typically Saturday nights, 7:30 PDT, and same thing. He pretty much does whatever he wants. So you can find me on Twitter at SpiderGD, and if you want to find me on Twitch, it's right here at twitch.tv/OWLN Show. Slambo, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at SlamBoverwatch. Don't look at my Twitch page. That is embarrassing.
And as for myself, you can find me on Twitter at StumblyDrunkCTR. And of course, if I'm live on Twitch, it will be over here at twitch.tv/OWLN Show. And with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Make sure you tune into the Overwatch League playoffs, because this has been what we have building up towards, this entire season long. And, let's break those viewership records for Overwatch League, because we definitely want to see a spike for the playoffs. This is when all the money is on the line. Let's tune in. Let's enjoy the series, and yeah, may the best team win. We'll see you guys back here on Wednesday for our variety show, where I don't know what we're doing this week. We kind of already did our playoff preview, but we'll get to that on Wednesday. But for now, guys, we'll talk to you later.
USA.
Thank you for listening to the Overwatch League Network. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at OWLN Show. The theme music for OWLN is the main theme and victory theme guitar remix by Michael Mack.